Previously on the Skip and Josh podcast.
Power rankings, as you said, I'm going to use one of your terms, also known as the standings.
Right, except it's not because according to the standings, I'm the best team, right? According to power rankings, I'm the second best team.
The Skip and Josh podcast is on now.
Hey, Cub, how's it going?
It's going great. It's nice to actually be in the same room with you. This is sort of like a treat for us because usually when we're recording, we're in different cities, but now we're sitting right next to each other, so this makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah, you know, we've done a few shows like this where we're together in the same room. It's such a weird dynamic. I think actually I prefer it the other way, I think. Believe it or not, it's like I'm more like I feel more comfortable in my space, and now like we're really next to each other, and it's somehow bothering me a little bit. It's really weird. I don't know how to explain it. No,
I know what you mean, because the room that we're in, it's not exactly a radio studio or anything like that. So we have to share the microphone, and so it's not an ideal situation. But still, it's good because now at least we're gonna have a guest on this episode, and so now if I want to tell you something, I could sort of just tap you on the shoulder or whatever. Whereas if we weren't in the same room, then you wouldn't know who's going to talk next or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, like like I said, it's so weird, but it's still great to have you here. There's no doubt. So, I mean, we've done the last few episodes. We've been heavy on the NFL. Like, we've been just doing NFL week 1, week 2, week 3. And but now we're getting into like a really interesting time of year with hockey's about to start and baseball playoffs, which are about to start, which for us is like really huge. Like my favorite playoffs is the baseball playoffs. I love it. But today we're actually going to do an NHL preview, which is amazing. We're going to preview the whole hockey season, and we have a really great guest. I don't know if you want to like talk about the guest or.
Yeah, we're gonna have in a few moments we're gonna have David Alter on the show. So for the listeners who don't know, David, he's a hockey reporter. He's worked at the Fan 590, Sportsnet, MapleLeafs.com, National Post, and The Athletic. So he's got quite an extensive background, and I think the listeners will enjoy the show. And yeah, without any further ado, let's give him a call and get him on the line.
All right.
So David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Welcome, David.
Thank you.
So before we get into our NHL preview, David, I just wanted to ask, how long ago did you get started in the sports media business, and how did you get started?
Wow. It's a long story, but I'll try and condense it as short as I can. I went to Western. I studied economics. I studied other things there, as one does when they change majors. But my second year there, I found out they had a campus radio station that does sports. I always thought it was indie music, but they did sports and play-by-play and broadcasting, and I thought that's a lot of fun. Before I knew it, I spent more time there than I did in class. And that turned into an internship. That radio station turned into an internship at the radio station where I worked for almost 8 years. As a reporter, producer, eventually my last title there was Leafs reporter there. So from that, I was able to take that to other gigs with the Leafs website, with the National Post for a brief period of time, and also with The Athletic, a startup. So I've kind of been anywhere and everywhere, but that's kind of the genesis of it. You find something you love, you give all your time to it, and hope the chips fall as they may. And for the most part, they've fallen pretty well for me.
By the way, the listeners don't know how you and I met. I was working at the CFL, and you were working for the Fan 590, and at the time you were covering the Argos. And this was in, 2008 or somewhere around there. I don't even remember, such a long time ago. So that's how you and I know each other.
Yeah, and it's funny because, they had a hockey reporter in Toronto at the Fan, Howard Berger, at the time. And I wanted to kind of take football. And I'm a pretty big football fan in general compared to hockey. Hockey, I'm a fan, but like not as much, especially when you work with it so closely. But football was kind of more my expertise, and so I enjoyed covering the Argos when I did. And then in 2008 when we met is when I was also sent by Rogers, the parent company, to cover all the Bills home games because of that impending Bills-Toronto series. So I thought that was going to be my first assignment before becoming some NFL football reporter. So that kind of didn't happen the way it did, even though people thought NFL in Toronto was imminent. It's almost 10 years later, and there's still no football. NFL in Toronto anyway. So it kind of shows you how you can assume things, but you just don't know until things happen or they don't happen.
So right now, I'm seeing that you're covering mostly the Leafs, which is great because that's really what we kind of want to talk about first. We wanted to really preview the whole NHL season, but our show is mostly Montreal and Toronto type of deal, so it's a perfect fit. So let's kind of jump right in and start off with the Leafs. Where do you see them? Do you see them progressing? They're such a hot team right now. Everybody's talking about the Leafs. Everywhere you go, even in Montreal, people are talking about the Leafs as the big up and coming team. Are you as high on them as most people are, or is there do you think it's a reality check coming? Where do you?
Yeah, no, I think that they have the offense to carry them to, at minimum, the spot they were in last year, which is a first round playoff appearance, if not more. I kind of have them pegged as a second or third round team right now. My pessimism is they are all offense, and there's still some questions in the back end, and some of the. I'm probably in the minority of some of the moves that they made in the offseason that don't really seem like upgrades. Patrick Marleau is an upgrade to some degree, but at 38 years old and the money he costs, you just don't know when that's going to go south. You don't know when you get to the late 30s of a player's career. You just don't know when their body is going to tell them that they're going to go through a precipitous fall. We might already be seeing it during training camp because right now the big question mark is Mike Babcock is getting on Marlowe's line with Kadri and Komarov about how they seem to be lacking the speed that the other lines have. So it's kind of interesting. So I still think there's problem areas despite the excitement that a Marner, Matthews, Nylander trio does provide for this team.
I'm glad you mentioned Marleau because, his trademark for his whole career, and it's been a long and really good career, has been his speed. So like you said, if the speed is if he's lost a step, then they have spent a lot of money on, a real expensive third liner, right? So,
right.
Yeah. And I was worried about him getting playing time over other young players. Do you think that's a concern? Or do you feel like the Leafs are saying, you know what, we've had our chance to kind of dip our toe in the water, so to speak, and now we're going to go for it, right? By signing a veteran,
So a lot of people have suggested that the Leafs now have to follow the Chicago model, which is you've got these two guys who are going to be due incredibly high pay raises under the NHL salary cap. So a couple of those guys, they're still an entry level, so you control their costs. So by the third year of Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves contracts, the Blackhawks won their first of a series of 3 cups in 2010. Before they had all those cap problems. So a lot of people see the Leafs as an example of, well, why not strike while the iron is hot, get them in while you have Chiefs surround them with veteran players, while you have these costs controlled, and you can really kind of go for it this year because Nylander's due a big pay raise next year. He's in the final year of his entry level. And then Marner and especially Matthews will get big pay raises the year after that. And if there's a lockout after that year, you can't even use cap overages, which I don't even think we have enough time on this podcast to explain. But that's a problem that the Leafs might face as well. So there's all this pressure, and you can kind of see it. The Leafs went from this slow, we're going to take our time, to kind of, I was wondering when is the point where they're going to kind of give into temptation a little bit and accelerate it. It's almost happened faster than I thought. I think this incredible rise that they had last year could hurt them long term because when you grow so fast in 1 year, the expectations that were supposed to be 3-4 years down the road are now 1 year down the road, and now everyone's putting the pressure and feeling Toronto's got to win now, when they still have a lot of questions, particularly on defense.
Right, and of course in Toronto, everything's always blown out of proportion, no matter what it is, hockey, baseball, basketball, you name it. So expectations are usually through the roof, even on a normal year in Leafland. So now it's even more amplified. One thing I wanted to ask you about, the Leafs goaltending situation. You don't hear a lot about it. Are they comfortable with their goaltending situation? Are they looking to make an upgrade? Is this who they're going to stick with?
Yeah, this is the spot. When they committed to Frederik Andersen, they had all this intel on him that suggested that he is their guy for the short and immediate term. It was a bit of a gamble because, outside of what they knew, he didn't have the amount of games played, the track record as a starter to really know if this was going to work out. So those were the questions. I think he did a pretty good job, especially towards the end of the season and the playoffs. He was definitely providing the goaltending they needed. That's not why they didn't advance further. Their questions are only going to lie in their backup. Right now, they brought back Curtis McElhinney on a 2-year deal, who was a stopgap solution when Jonas Enroth didn't work out for them after 4 starts, failing to get a win. And McElhinney, based on who you talk to, is kind of that old school goaltender that doesn't technically make you look comfortable in that spot, but can make the 10 Beller saves with the goalie slang. That can really see. He had arguably the biggest save for the Leafs season last year on Sidney Crosby in front of an open net. If Sidney Crosby scores that goal, the Leafs might not have got that second wildcard spot in that second last game of the season the way it kind of worked out. So their goaltending's okay for now, but it's only as long as Anderson's healthy. If he runs into any injury problems, then the Leafs have a real problem because they don't have the confidence in anyone else underneath them that they're expecting Anderson to start 68 games this season.
Yeah, that's a tall order for Anderson to start that many games. And especially like you already said, and when like everybody kind of knows, like there's not like the blue line's not strong to start with, so they need strong goaltending, right? And you mentioned the Chicago model, but the only thing is with the Chicago model, like this is getting into their lack of defensemen. Chicago had Keith and Seabrook, these 2 rocks, right? And like, do the Leafs have? I mean, Morgan Riley. Like, I don't know. Like, who do the Leafs? Who do you think are gonna really like log the big minutes for the Leafs on the blue line?
So at the start of this build, the talk was Morgan Riley was going to be this guy. Morgan Riley is the future. They drafted him high. They got to get him a solid player to play with. He's going to be eating top pair minutes. And then last season, he was doing that for the most part, but he started to struggle a bit, and they swapped him out with Jake Gardiner. And then all the talk at camp now is about how much better Jake Gardiner is. And Babcock even said to the media that I think he might be our best defenseman right now. So Jake Gardiner now seems to be that guy who, along with Nikita Zaitsev on the right side, is going to be eating top pair minutes. But the fact that their top 4 are interchangeable speaks to the lack of top pairing defensemen that they actually have. And yeah, they could evolve to that spot, but I don't know if they're the stud defenseman. And now you've got Ron Hainsey in there in the top 4 spot, who's given $3 million. At another older defenseman, age 36, got his first cup. No disrespect to what he accomplished in a fill-in role with the Penguins being acquired from Carolina last year, but I don't know how sustainable that is over the course of an 82-game season to really feel that the Leafs really upgraded in that spot.
Yeah, I know.
So,
Hainsey looked great in the playoffs, but I mean, are they going to rely on him for 80 games now to log like big minutes that he did? I don't think that's realistic, right?
They tried to get a top pairing defenseman via trade, and it's still not off the table. I think they're hoping some other teams are going to run into some sort of cap problems when they cut their rosters and not give away someone on waivers, that they are hoping they can figure out something. I know they wanted to try to work out a deal with the Islanders. James Van Riemsdyk and Travis Hamonic were talked about, going back and forth with Van Riemsdyk being a unrestricted free agent after this season, and they have plenty of wingers who can fill that role and younger talent, as you mentioned. But they've not been able to parlay that, and to me, that in that respect, the offseason kind of failed in that spot, because when you look at the rosters, outside of picking up a bunch of late 30-year-old guys, they didn't really improve their roster too much, with the exception that the rookies are now going to be sophomores, so they're going to be that much better than they were last year.
You know, sometimes those trades that you mentioned, like these rumors that you hear about, maybe they don't come to fruition now, and then they get re-looked at the trade deadline, and some of the same names tend to come up again, right? So we'll see what happens there. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if now's a good time to switch gears a little bit and talk about the Habs. I know you've been covering the Leafs during the preseason, and I know one of the games you covered was against the Habs, where the Habs actually didn't perform well at all. I think that was the game where Austin Matthews scored a hat trick.
Yeah.
So obviously Skip and I have our opinions on the Habs, but they made quite a few changes during the offseason. I mean, just to name a few, they lost Radulov, Markov, Emelin, Bolya, and Sergachev, who only played about 10 games last year. And the key additions were Jonathan Drouin, Mark Streit, Alish Hemsky, Karl Alzner, and David Schlemko. So in your one time of seeing the Habs live, what's your analysis of that team?
I think they're going to have real problems this year. I look at the talent that they lost compared to what they have now, and they don't look like they're going to be a better all-around team than they were last year. And the goal was to try and rely less on Carey Price this year, not more. And I look at the makeup of their roster right now. One guy I was impressed with, and as good of a thing it is for Montreal, I don't know if it's a great thing because it speaks to the vacancies they have in their lineup, is the emergence of Victor Met playing Shea Weber. Victor Met was a late cut to the World Junior team last year and was not on anyone's radar. Now, that speaks to the work he's put in to get this opportunity. But, I mean, it also speaks to now you're going to speak – this guy's going to be on a top pairing being relied upon to get the puck out fast and protect the amount of shots against for Carey Price compared to the talent that they did lose. I just don't see – I don't see improvement in there. Karl Alzner was a guy who couldn't make Washington's roster for the playoffs because he just wasn't good enough. He had some injury issues, but they weren't severe enough in the playoffs. People play through it. So the Karl Alzner one is another one that scratches my head a little bit. It would almost seem like they kind of had to do something to speak to the loss on defense that they had, and he's a name, but I just don't see that as an improved spot. Mark Streit, his best years are behind him, but they have him in the right spot on the 5-6. Guy who could probably still help on the point with his shot during the power play. I like Arturi Lehkonen. I got to know him a little bit last year, and I think that there's some young, good talent up front. But I don't, based on the amount of talent and the names, the departures that you mentioned, I just don't see this team being better than they were last year.
Yeah, it's just the age-old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. They just shuffled around a lot of names and brought in this guy and that guy, and so some guys left and new guys came in, but it's still the same. The crux of the team is still 100% relying on Carey Price. They can't score 5-on-5, and they have no centers, right? Like, so it's like...
Well, they don't have a top-line center.
Well, yeah.
They're missing a top-line center. And what I said to Skip, actually, in July after the free agency period, I said, you know what? The Habs are going to make the playoffs again, and they're going to lose in the first round again. And now, actually, I'm even more pessimistic today than I was in July because I don't know where they're going to get the scoring from. I really don't. And, yeah, Carey Price might be the best goaltender in the world, but unless he gets a shutout every night, how are you going to win games?
And they're going to rely on third-line guys to try and be first-line guys. And for a lot of guys who are smaller or whatever, it's not necessarily worked out. Some guys have been able to make that transition, but if you've been spending many of your years on a second or a shutdown role and you're expected to now be free open and produce, it's not an easy thing to do. You get the tougher matchups against the opposition, so there's less space there for you. It's gonna be tough. But I mean, let's see what happens with waivers as the final cuts are made. The good news for Habs fans is preseason indications are usually no reflection whatsoever of how the season works out. And given the amount of losses they've piled up in the preseason, I think Montreal should feel good about that.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado was undefeated last year in the preseason. So,
right.
I mean, and we all know how their season went. So I'm just going to put on my Habs hat because I am a Habs fan. So I'm trying to stay optimistic about them. You know, the optimistic part of my brain is saying, you know what, it's still the same team that won the Atlantic Division last year. So yes, with all the deficiencies that we just mentioned, they still managed to have a pretty good season. They have a better coach, supposedly, they have a better coach. I mean, I was not a fan of Therrien at all. But so right. I'm trying to stay positive, honestly. But when I see all these bodies on the blue line, like you said, Mark Streit and there's some real corpses there, like it's really like it's not looking good. Like I'm really not enthusiastic about the blue line, and then we all know like that the forwards, like there's some good forwards there, but it's just the depth is not there to be able to to even score 3 goals a game sometimes, right? So
no, they lost a lot of talent. I mean, Radulov, I know, was kind of like, it was hard to kind of deal and work with him and figure out something there, but I mean, he was a guy who can score. He was offensive. He was in that spot. It was a perfect fit. And he essentially basically went to Dallas just because, I mean, he couldn't get what he wanted in Montreal, and it was pretty much the identical offer in Dallas. But the difference is the tax rate is lower, so I guess he can see it as a win in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Tax.
They brought in Drouin, which was great. Like I like the fact that they brought in this young offensive player, but they needed to keep Radulov and add Drouin. Like they need an extra body, not just status quo. So in terms of the offense,
need 2 talented guys to play together and 1 guy to get them the puck, and it's like they have to spread their talented guys by themselves with a lot of filler, and that's going to be their problem offensively.
So I was looking at last year's final standings in the NHL, and Montreal won the Atlantic Division. And I looked at that, and I forgot that it had happened. And I'm still wondering how they won the division. And then I looked at the rest of the division, and I really don't see any team that jumps out and says to me, oh, that team's definitely going to win the Atlantic. It's in my opinion the weakest division in the league. So who do you think is going to win that division?
I think Tampa is going to come back with a vengeance this year. I think Tampa's injury problems were the reason why that division was so wide open to begin with. They had Drouin, but Drouin was one of many, many different guys.
Right, he was not an essential player on their team.
They were stacked. Remember, Stamkos got hurt again and missed a lot of the stretch. And even then, they were still knocking on the door for a playoff spot towards the end. They were starting to make a little bit of an emergence and almost did it. Like they finished 1 point behind the Leafs for that second wild card spot, and that's because they went on quite the run towards the end.
Yeah, they got crazy hot at the end, but it was like too little. It was like they just ran out of racetrack.
That's why I mentioned that McElhinney save against the Penguins late, because they almost gave that game away. And then based on the standings, the Leafs probably wouldn't have made the playoffs as a result, because they would have had 1 less regulation win and Tampa would have had the tiebreak. But that's what I mean by Toronto being on the bubble there. Even though they made it, they almost didn't make it. Anyway, so I think Tampa is one of the most talented teams in the Atlantic Division. They just ran into severe injury problems. They've got Hedman, they've got Stamkos, they've got a bunch of different guys who can play in different spots and are interchangeable offensively. I see them bouncing back huge. I think now when you look at man games lost, it's such a big decider of the bubble teams of who gets in and who doesn't get in. Toronto stayed relatively healthy all year last year. None of their forwards really got hurt, so they were able to ice their best lineup always. Tampa had so many injuries, and I think that was a big difference. Same with Montreal. I think Montreal kind of got some of the advantage of that, but now their lack of talent is going to be in there. Ottawa's a really interesting situation because they did get better goaltending and they managed to kind of thrive. I think Boston can kind of stay around the same there, but it is very wide open. And Florida also intrigues me a little bit. Buffalo seems like they're determined to not be the last place team they've been for the last couple of years. So it really is wide open, but I think the biggest point improver is going to be Tampa. I think they're much better than a lot of people are giving them credit for.
So then should I assume by your comments that Steven Stamkos is 100% healthy, and how many games do you think he's going to actually play this season?
Yeah, I think he'll play for, I mean, it's tough to really project in, like, you don't know what injuries are going to happen with anybody at any given time. Like that one that kept him from the Olympics was a freak accident. It's tough to say, but when he is healthy or when he's playing, he's a threat. There's no questioning his skill level. And for top flight talent to be back on the ice is the difference between a great team and a good team. So I think even if he plays just 60 games, that team's a playoff team. No question.
So the Metropolitan Division was the the strongest division last year, probably in the whole NHL, with Pittsburgh, Washington, the Rangers, right? I mean, they were and the Columbus, who made a huge step forward last year. Do you see all those 4 teams still like keeping up their big point totals, or is there any drop off for anyone coming, you think?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, looking at it, it's you've got Washington, who looks like they should still be pretty good in the regular season. Pittsburgh is only going to be better because they're going to be healthier. Like they are the only reason we've had repeat cup winners in the salary cap era for the first time with Pittsburgh was because they defied every rule that a cup winning. Everyone had national walking over Pittsburgh. And if you looked at shot totals or everything, it was heavily weighed in favor of the Predators. But they got lights out goaltending, a throwback to the old way you used to win Stanley Cups. They got their substitute guys, especially on defense, really stepping up and playing beyond their level that they typically show. But now they've got Letang back, and they're going to be as good. And I don't see anything slowing them down. I think they'll be just where they are. I don't think they're going to be having a massive drop off there. Carolina has a lot of skilled young guys, and I think that team is headed for a big improvement. New Jersey, when you add a number 1 overall pick, that seems to lift up the spirits of a team. There's a lot of goodwill there now. Nico Hischier's looked pretty good so far. So I think you're going to see pretty much the same. The Rangers might be the team I think kind of goes into that fall. I don't see much from them that suggests that it's going to be better. They've always kind of balanced the line of rebuild and veterans at the same time, and I think now that's going to start finally catching up to them. So I think the Rangers are kind of in for the fall. I think Pittsburgh wins the division.
So a pattern that I've noticed is that when John Tortorella coaches a team, his first year there, he usually does well, but then it goes downhill from there. So Columbus had an excellent season last year. Do you see them improving upon last year, or are they going to take a step back now?
Yeah, that's interesting. They mentioned about the Tortorella teams. I think Columbus should be all right. Sergei Bobrovsky's been pretty good for them. Defensively, though, I'm still not sure. The talent is still very much up front. I just see this year being a year where we learn how important defense is again. And I think Columbus could fall. I still think they make the playoffs, but I don't think they necessarily have the run they have. I know talking to some people in Columbus, they were just so frustrated with how good this season was, yet they couldn't create separation on anybody. And given the really weird divisional playoff format, they had the hardest matchup for the first round in the Penguins. Like you play that well, and that's where you've got to go in the first round because of a really weird divisional alignment this year. It seemed pretty unfair to them. They seemed to kind of run into some horrible luck. I think they're a playoff team. I think they dip a little bit because I think they were playing well beyond, especially in the earlier parts of the season, that they're in for a dip, but I think they could still squeak in there.
Listeners of this show will know that I've complained about the NHL playoff format many, many times. It bothers me like you have no idea that a team that has such a good record doesn't end up getting rewarded by playing a really weak team in the first round. So we can have a whole episode just on that. But
I add one little thing to that.
Please.
I wrote a thing last year about how if they should make it more fun and just rank the leagues 1 through 16, but because points are so close and they have these loser points that really inflate the stats, you should just rank the teams 1 to 16 and have those teams as your playoff teams, but then your best team gets to pick the opponent based on where they traject, if the team's on an upswing, downswing, or if they feel they match better to the strengths. It really does reward the best team that way.
Imagine a playoff format where the team picks their opponents.
You know, that's so crazy. It just may work.
Like, talk about a progressive league. I mean,
I think that would be fantastic, but hockey's too traditional that you can sell the ratings to having a playoff selection show. Like there'd be so much money behind that, but they're too conservative, so they won't do it.
I love the idea. The thing is, I don't think the NHL would do it, because what happens if in the first round, I don't know, let's say a team like Toronto, let's just say they finish first overall and they want to play LA, the travel cost would just be exorbitant. I don't have an issue with it at all, but it seems
there's a lot of there's no travel costs really as a problem in the NHL, though. I could see that in lower leagues, but in the NHL it's not a problem. The only reason Toronto wouldn't want to do that is because they wouldn't want to tax themselves on the travel. So their incentive, if you're a West Coast team, your incentive to avoid that in the first round is to finish high so that you can pick your own fate and avoid that situation.
I love the idea. Anyway, let's move on to the Central Division. The Central Division was interesting in that Chicago, seems like they've had a good season every year for the last decade almost. They won the division last year, but then they lost in 4 straight in the first round to Nashville. So was that first round a fluke, or does Chicago have something to worry about? And, is Nashville going to be able to go all the way back to the Stanley Cup Finals? What's the prognosis for that division?
Yeah, it's so wide open. I mean, Nashville looks better than ever. Chicago, I think they made the right off-season acquisition moves. I think they know who works well together. And it's amazing how many trades Chicago and Columbus can make to bring guys back. So I think I like what they did in getting Patrick Sharp back. I think they know who works well with that team, and they can manipulate and change. Having no Marian Hossa is going to be a problem, I think. He's older, so I think that creates problems. I think there's a little bit of cap manipulation there too.
For sure.
Yeah. I've never heard of anyone being allergic to hockey equipment, but
no, I don't dispute the actual charge, but I mean, you can choose to play through it or right? And I mean, in that spot, it's weird because if they retire, it's a severe cap penalty. If he retires, it's a severe cap penalty, and Chicago can't deal with that. But if he just goes on a long-term injury, Chicago can deal with that, and the guy gets his money. So it behooves both sides to go that route. Anyway. Chicago in that spot, it's tough. It really is. I never want to discount them because of the talent that they have up front, but yeah, they keep running into teams that are just getting better and younger and faster that are just surprising them. That I think if they run into similar problems again, they're going to have to overhaul that team somehow and kind of learn that they have to start again from scratch. So I think Nashville can go back in there. I really like Dallas this year too. I think Dallas improved a lot.
Well, Dallas acquired Radulov, and they also have Ben Bishop now, so they've certainly made the most improvements to their team of anyone in that division.
Dallas has always had goaltending problems. They were spending so much on 2 1B goaltenders that the platoon made no sense. And I know for a long time, they were seeking Ben Bishop and looking for a way for him to become available. So the way that came around, Dallas looks pretty good. St. Louis is in tough because losing Robbie Fabry is going to hurt no matter what.
Do you think they're going to sign Jagger?
Oh, well, it sounds like they're going to go Scotty Upshall instead.
Oh God.
So I think there is some interest there. I think Jagger is just going to Brett Favre it. I honestly think Jagger is going to Brett Favre. He'll play a little bit. He'll go to the Olympics. And then after the Olympics, the same day the Olympic ends, like the next day, is the last day a player can sign a contract and be eligible to play in the playoffs. So
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's because it's the same day as the trade deadline. After the deadline, if you sign a new player, it happened with, who was that goaltender in Dallas that came out of retirement? Marty Turco. Right. Remember he signed for like a couple of games just to finish out for Boston in the regular season? I believe it was because they ran into problems. They needed someone to play, but he wasn't eligible for the playoffs because it was after that. It's similar to baseball's September 1st deadline where you can't make a trade because if you do, that player is not eligible for the postseason. Jay said that with Darwin Barney his first go around. He couldn't play in the playoffs, but they needed infield help because they're running into injury problems towards the playoffs. Anyway, yeah, so in that spot, Jagger is just going to Brett Favre it and just play. I think no one's going to get him, but someone's going to run into injury problems, and he's going to have such a good showing at the Olympics that all scouts are going to be watching that like they did in '94 and realize he could still help us down the stretch and be playoff eligible, sign him to a partial contract, and he could still play.
Right. I really do agree with you. The Central's completely wide open. You know, you can't discount Chicago. Minnesota is a team on the rise. St. Louis, they're a strong team no matter what. Nashville, we saw what they did in the playoffs, and then now Dallas, right? But the thing,
Colorado is the only team that really don't give a prayer at all.
You mentioned Ben Bishop, and like Dallas thinks they have their man now, right? But I'm not convinced because Ben Bishop has never stayed healthy. So,
that's the whole. I wonder if that's the whole bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Right. He's such a big man, right? Yeah.
He's such a big man for making those kind of moves. Because I was a goalie, and as a goalie back then, you were the smallest guy on the team, right? Not the biggest.
Right.
But the positions evolved because everyone looking out, they were like, well, if you're bigger, you cover more of the net. It's a matter of how much of the net you cover. Like if your shoulder goes past the crossbar when you get down on your knees from the butterfly. But yeah, I mean, now as they get more skilled and faster, that happens. Ben Bishop doesn't stay healthy, but maybe this time he does. A change of scenery. It was tough because he was commanding a lot of money, and Tampa was running into problems where they felt Vasilevsky can do as good a job.
And they're not wrong about that. They're right,
Right, but for a lot cheaper.
Yeah. And
that's part of the goalie stigma now. In a cap world, it's so hard to commit big dollars to a goalie unless you're 100% sure. That's why so few teams do it.
Right.
So in the Pacific Division, the Edmonton Oilers are kind of mirroring the Maple Leafs. Everyone is obviously very high on Connor McDavid, and I realize he's been in the league 1 year longer than Austin Matthews, but they certainly took huge steps forward last year. So now everyone's thinking, everyone in Edmonton thinks they're going to win the Cup this year. I think it's a little too soon for that. But what do you think the outlook is for the Oilers and for the Pacific Division in general?
The Oilers look pretty good, not only in the fact that they've got the Connor McDavid and all that stacked up, but why everyone's so optimistic about Edmonton is because of how well Leon Draisaitl played by carrying his own line. And it made it look like they were just gifted another star who they didn't project into that spot. So they are loaded. They are loaded in that spot, and that is incredibly dangerous. Defensively, they seem to shore up a few things. Their goaltending, I'm still not as convinced on, although they feel they've got the answer there. I think Edmonton is going to go deep and far. I don't know if they're going to win the whole thing, but they look very good right now.
I mean, you've got the perennial, Anaheim Ducks and San Jose Sharks, who seem to always be at the top of that division. And those are like the veteran teams now, those two teams, and maybe their time has come and gone, and Edmonton's the up and coming team. And I didn't expect them to go into the second round, but they certainly played exciting hockey in the playoffs, that's for sure.
Yeah, they did. I mean, look, Adam Larson was a good pickup for them in that spot, even though a lot of people hated that trade with New Jersey because you were getting a number 4 guy for a number 1 overall pick.
When they made that trade, I was like, I didn't understand it at all. Like I was flabbergasted. I was like, how could they make that trade? And then as the season progressed, and then especially as the playoffs happened, I was like, oh, I guess they knew what they were doing, right? I mean,
they filled the need.
Yeah.
They didn't have anybody there, right? They filled the need getting into that spot. Oscar Klefbom works well with them too. And look, there's only so many years you can have a top 3 pick that you can't keep everybody. The cap prohibits you from that.
Right.
If they're all going to realize their potential, you cannot keep them. So Eberle had to go. So you also had, Taylor Hall. He just had to go. Yeah. It sucks, but I mean, look at the moves they made in place, and having Leon Draisaitl there as a number 2 spot, you could argue it's not even an argument. He's better than them, and he can carry that spot. So I think their questions now are just going to be, look, is Cam Talbot really the guy in that spot? Because he seemed to struggle before finding that spot.
It's very similar to the Leafs, right? Like the
Yeah.
Oilers fans are asking about Cam Talbot, and the Leafs fans are wondering about Anderson. You know, it's very
The
similar.
difference
situation.
there was Anderson at least had been to a playoffs before and carried the Ducks for a big portion of their playoff run, playing in front of a good team, that he could do that. So the Leafs theory was, okay, well, you know, we're going to have such a good team in front of him that he's going to thrive, and all these other work ethic things and mechanics make it like a no-brainer that he's our guy. Where in Edmonton, I mean, Cam Talbot, you know, is just kind of struggling, bouncing around spots. That this is the spot that they decided, and they feel, after being a backup with the Rangers and whatnot, that this is the guy. Now New York is worried because they feel like they got rid of Cam Talbot, and they don't have any solution after Lundqvist if he just decides this year's the year where he doesn't have it anymore.
So David, let the listeners know where they can like follow you on Twitter or Instagram or any other social media, you know, where they can read your stuff or see any videos that you might post.
You know that little app with the little blue Tweety bird? Yeah.
So my Twitter account is Dalter, my first initial and last name together, @Dalter. My Facebook professional account is @AlterDave. There's a lot of David Alters who got on the train before I did. So that's my Facebook professional one. Also, I have an Instagram, which is DavidAlter35, but that's just photos and videos of a dog. So like that, so I share that all the time. So that's probably not of any use to anyone. And stay tuned for everything else. But like all my work that comes with various different platforms are always tweeted out through my Twitter. So
okay.
So stay tuned to that.
And do you know what your next assignment is, or you don't know that yet?
I do not know that yet, but stay tuned.
Okay. Well, David, thanks for being on our show today. We really appreciate it. It was excellent for us, and hopefully you enjoyed it as well. And maybe we'll have you on, I don't know, at the All-Star break or before the NHL playoffs. Who knows?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to come on.
All right. Thank you very much, David.
Appreciate it, guys.
Okay, so that was our NHL preview with hockey reporter David Alter. Skip, I really enjoyed that. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy that too, because he certainly brings a lot of insight and knowledge to the show.
It reminded me a lot of when we had Neil on for the NFL preview. At one point, I forget what he was talking about, but I was like, oh boy, he's elevating the knowledge that happened, that our normal knowledge, right? That's happening here.
He was talking about the cap space that certain teams had, and so I mean, I didn't even know about that rule, and I still don't understand it. I'll have to talk to him later and maybe ask him about it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty great. I mean, certainly the knowledge that he brings specifically about the Leafs and the Habs, because the Leafs and Habs have played in each other in the preseason so far this year. It's great, especially for this show where we really want to focus on what's happening in Montreal and Toronto, where we both live, you know, so yeah. Yeah, so before we sign off, remember you can listen and subscribe to new and archived episodes of the Skip and Josh podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or the podcast app of your choice. And if you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please definitely leave us a review. We would love to hear from you via email, skipandjoshshow@gmail.com, via Twitter @skipandjosh, or by liking and following our Facebook page. And you can also leave a review for our show on the Facebook page now. As always, you can get all the links that I just mentioned on our website, skipandjosh.com. And on our website, we are counting down to the 1-year anniversary of the podcast. So if you want to know how many days to the 1-year anniversary, go to the website and it'll be right there for you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Skip.
All right. Talk to you next time.
The Skip and Josh podcast is over now. Don't worry, there'll be another episode soon.